Welcome, brave listeners, to Wilhelm Presents Frightening Tales. I am your host, Wilhelm. Tune in each week where I entertain my listeners with another dark and creepy tale of the paranormal, donated by authors from all over the world. If you're an author of some paranormal fiction and would like to share a story with my listeners, submit one at frighteningtales.com. And while you're there, tune in for more than 100 episodes of previous content. Today's episode is written by Fernando Sanchez, a technical writer, creative writer, and lover of the written word. Born under the sign of Aquarius, Fernando ran with wolves as a child and chased ghosts and demons with a smirk on his face. Did I mention he loves writing? Here's his tale, Watchers at the Black Gate. It might have been a dream, and it might not. Reality, my reality, sometimes manifests itself shrouded inside a mantle of dreamlike consequences that confuses and perverts my judgment. Maybe parts of it were a dream and the rest are just fanciful additions born out of fever and long-forgotten terrors in later years. These days, my mind is not as sharp as it once was. When I was still young and full of the idealism that the passage of time steadily quashes. But be it a dream or half-dream, the things that happened on that autumn day so many years ago are for me as true and real as the air I breathe. Let me tell you about it. The town of Sundlow lies near the crest of a hill overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, just south of Halifax in Nova Scotia. It is a wild and desolate landscape constantly covered by gray rolling clouds, where summers are pitifully short and the winters are unmercifully long. A place where December twilights cast a long and icy shadow upon the land, and the cold of the night chills the soul of the bravest. Sudlow can hardly be called a town. Rather, it's more of a hamlet with notions and aspirations. The locals go about their business with aplomb, paying little heed to the passing of the seasons. Most people live off the sea or the land. Fishermen, farmers, and a few tradesmen make up the bulk of the town's economic activity. There's very little technology in the area. Even now, a cellular signal is patchy at best and downright non-existent at worst. The nearest mast is about 15 miles out of north. So there are good days when your handset works, and then you have the bad days when your $500 toy is little more than a paperweight in your pocket. There were no cellular phones back in my childhood, of course. A few families, including mine, had a phone, one of those antique models with rotary dials that went out of fashion more than 4 decades ago. But fierce storms roll in from the Atlantic every second week once cold weather starts proper. So the old wooden poles would spend most winters splintered across dirt roads, rolling listlessly in the wind, their frayed cables lashing about. Repair crews wouldn't come around until spring made its timid entrance from beyond the southern hills. Sudlow was, and to a degree still is, an isolated place. A lonely, place where children had little more to do than play out in the fields when the weather allowed, and watch the seasons go by, as they always do, and always will. I was lucky to have a dog, a small mutt named Raider. I found him wandering around one evening. He was all dirty and rather hungry, and appeared to be as alone and lonely as I was. His fur was all shades of brown and matted, with strands of dried mud caked all over it. He was taking a piss when he first saw me. He shook himself, sat down, and regarded me with a look somewhere between suspicion and great relief. He flinched the first time I petted him, but took to me easily enough, and I to him. Raider became part of my childhood, and I still remember him fondly. I would have spent most of my younger years alone, had it not been for Raider. Maybe he was sent to me by a greater power. Who knows? There are many things I don't understand, nor do I care to find out. Some things just are. So, Raider and I would go on long walks during summer evenings, and later in the year, too, when weather permitted. We'd walk along the hills around Sudlow and sometimes walk down to the pier below. Raider and I would sit down on a bench and watch the fishing boats sail in and out, their nets empty on the way out, and full of algae and trash and writhing fish on their return journey. I still remember the smell, salty, wet, and full of pungent death. To this day, I've never been able to eat fish. We'd sit there for hours, Raider and I, listening to the gulls cawing all around us and the creaking of the boats as they bobbed up and down with the tide, and the voices of the fishermen cursing and calling out words I did not understand. Sometimes they spoke about a gate somewhere in the hills, and that there were people there, people who watched from the other side. Old mariners' tales, I thought. I'd heard about that gate before, in overheard conversations when Mother sent me down to the local pub to fetch Dad on a Sunday evening, so he wouldn't miss his dinner. One time, one of the town's older folks, old Mackenzie, I think it was, grabbed me while Dad went to the men's room and told me to stay away from the black gate. The gate only opens one way, he said, right to my face, and I could smell stale rum off his breath and beard. It only opens one way. So it does, and what it opens to is wrong, just wrong. Do you hear? Dad came back then and pulled me away from old Mackenzie and his drinking pals. I heard the old man died a few months after that. Dad said old Mackenzie fell off the pier, banged his head on a moored boat, and drowned. I'd imagine that his breath still reeked of stale rum when he lost his footing and fell to his death. I asked Dad about the Black Gate after dinner that Sunday night. Dad said all he knew was Granddad had told him that when he was about my age, the Black Gate is not a place for children to play around, and that for all he knew, Halifax County people had come in one day about 5 years before and cleaned up the place. The gate had been padlocked since, he thought. But where is it? I asked. The place is padlocked, William, Dad said to me, and it's time to go to sleep. His tone made it clear that there would be no more talking about that matter, and perhaps that was for the better. Never thought much about the Black Gate after that, but I had a very vivid dream about it the night I heard old Mackenzie died. I remembered that dream very well, and I have had recurring variations of it during times of stress in my life. In my dream, I walk along the pier, and the sky is deep purple and has that yellowish tint just before a storm breaks out. The pier is very quiet, no seagulls cawing overhead, and no boats creaking in the water. Nothing. Just the sound of my own footsteps echoing along an unnaturally long pier that seems to stretch far out to sea. And there is something at the edge of the water. A gate. A closed gate. Then I see something else. It's nothing more than a hulking shape at first, standing near that gate. Something is waving slowly up in the air. Is it an arm? Whatever it is, it beckons me. I feel fear, and I want to stop walking, but I simply can't. My legs keep moving forward towards the beckoning shape, and the gate beyond it. I'm much closer now, and then I look around to see that there is nothing but open water around me. I'm walking far out into the sea. The town is miles behind me. As I get closer, I see that the shape is old Mackenzie. He's talking, or at least his mouth is moving, but I can't make out what he's saying, 'cause brackish water trickles through his lips. He's still beckoning me with one hand, and I see he's holding a half-empty bottle of rum in the other. Crazy. I see my body swirling around the liquid inside the bottle. It smells of piss and stale rum, and it's overwhelming and disgusting. And old Mackenzie keeps beckoning, and I keep walking forth even though I don't want to. And I think I'm crying. Old Mackenzie's eyes are empty sockets festooned by algae that are long and scraggy and green. Filthy, oily water flows from the old dead man's nostrils. And now I'm almost within reach of his arms, and I see moribund fish writhing inside his mouth. Then the gate opens behind the thing that was old Mackenzie, and then he speaks, and this time I can perfectly understand what the dead man says, and the voice is gravelly and wet, as if he was talking through jagged pebbles. "The gate opens only one way, young William. Only one way. Walk, William. Walk and see for yourself." Old Mackenzie grabs my hand, and it feels cold and wet and clammy on my skin, and I want to scream, but I can't. The gate opens, and the dead man pushes me through. I woke up screaming, or at least I think I did. A moaning sound echoed in my mind for a long few seconds. And for a moment, I really wasn't sure whether I had fallen off the pier and into the dark water below. Only when Raider begins licking the sweat off my face, I woke up fully, and I realized where I was. It was a week shy of my 12th birthday when I first saw the Black Gate. It was a crisp autumn day in early October. I remember it well because it was the first sunny day in a while. Heavy rain had fallen for 2 or 3 days, keeping us inside. Raider and I were anxious to get out and walk. So, when the sun shone in the sky, I got up and quickly put on my walking boots, as Raider wagged his tail as he always did before a walk time. Dad told me to be careful, though, as heavy rain tends to cause mudslides out in the fields. I said I would, and off we went. The day turned out beautiful. One of those bright and fresh days when the ground smells of rain and you can feel the chill of the coming winter brushing across your face. Raider and I walked all day. We went down to the beach below and up again, enjoying the clear views out to sea. You could see almost as far as Halifax on days like these. We walked and we listened to the gulls' bothersome cawing above us, and I threw sticks into the water for Raider to fetch. This was Raider's favorite game. He would sit beside me and look up with his big brown eyes, panting in anticipation. I'd throw the stick and he'd dash headlong into the water to fetch it. He'd always bark once. When he found it, he would run back to me and drop the wet stick at my feet. It was late afternoon. I know that because I began to feel hungry. Home time, I thought. And Rita looked up at me and barked once, as if to agree. So we started for home. Only this time we couldn't go the usual way, because the path had been blocked by a mudslide. Not a big deal in summer, but darkness closes in fast in autumn. I realized with a heavy heart that I had miscalculated the time, and that I was much later than I thought. The sun had started its final descent down into the horizon. It was still bright, but only just. Taking the long way around home would mean an extra 15 or 20 minutes. It'd likely be full dark by then. I sighed and turned back, walking briskly with Raider trotting close behind. Now, I must tell you that I wasn't a scared child. I had never been afraid of the dark once. I realized that the darkness is nothing but the absence of light, and that people, good or bad, exist both in the light and the shadows of this world. Walking home in the dark was hardly ideal and perhaps a tad unpleasant, but it did not scare me. Besides, I had Raider with me. His presence always comforted and reassured me, and I'm pretty sure Raider felt the same way. So we walked the long way, which took us to a sort of crossroads about 2 miles from home. It was a place that Sudlow folks called the Pilgrim's Crossway. Dad had told me a bunch of people had once come to Sudlow from the sea and got lost in a storm. They had taken the wrong turn here at the crossroads while looking for the town, and ended up going missing down at the coves, never to be seen again. Local folklore, Dad said, and I'd always believed it to be just that, a story that had probably never happened. Or had happened in some way, but not how it was told. There's always a kernel of truth in almost every legend, after all. But now, standing there in the quickly fading light, I began to think differently. There was something odd about the place where the roads met, all right. The local council had erected signs pointing the way to Sudlow, of course, but these had long since been torn down by either bad weather or vandalism. I could see what was left of the signs, pieces of wood with jagged edges jutting from the ground, crooked and discolored. and suddenly I realized that I didn't actually know the right way home from this particular spot, and neither did Raider, it seemed. He was sort of circling around a few steps ahead of me, sniffing the air and looking here and there. Then he stopped and turned his head to me, as if to say, "Well, brother, what do we do now?" I noticed with some disquiet that my shadow had become long and thin on the ground. Sunlight was a sliver of lost hope in the sky. Soon night would come. I still felt no fear, but an insidious uneasiness had crept up the back of my mind. I had an unpleasant feeling in the pit of my stomach, too. Raider seemed to perceive it, as he nudged my leg and barked softly a couple of times. I petted his fur to reassure him, but I'm not sure it worked for either one of us. Nightfall has a funny way of robbing the light. In Sudlow, the town's location so near the coastline means that fog is quite a common thing, particularly in autumn and winter. October is the month of mists in my corner of the world, and sure enough, I could now see a fog bank beginning to drift ashore. It rolled in from the sea, hanging low over the water, coming more or less straight towards us. I began walking again, and Raider followed. Occasionally he glanced over at the coming fog and uttered a little cry. We were moving roughly parallel to the coastline, and I quickly realized that we would not be able to outrun the fog bank. We were going to be caught in the open. Just as night fell on the hills around Sudlow, I looked skyward and saw no more sunlight, only a moonless gray mantle. And then it was all around us, a chilling shroud of nothingness that turned the world around us into a treacherous pit. Visibility was suddenly reduced to a few feet ahead. And was there a rumble of thunder out at sea? I kept walking, acutely aware that the terrain in this part of the hills was uneven at best. There were rocky outcrops and ledges that could lead to a nasty fall. And I was also aware that I didn't have the faintest idea of where I was. I tried to draw a map of Sudlow in my head and position myself in relation to the town. But no use. It's no good to know where you want to go if you don't know where you are to begin with. The path took a downward slope now, and I almost tripped over myself. I stopped to catch my breath and noticed that Raider was gone. I called after him twice. I heard him bark, and the sound was low and distant. I called again, and once more Raider barked in response. But this time the sound had a shrill tone that I didn't like. He barked twice, 3 times, and then stopped. I called out his name, but there was no answer, other than another rumble of thunder, closer this time. I have never had much of an imagination. I'll confess to that. I don't say this with shame or embarrassment either, just matter-of-factly. So perhaps my mind was less open to being scared. But I guess that we all have innate fears that are awakened under certain circumstances. For the first time in my life, I felt completely disoriented and lost. The fog was both disconcerting and disquieting. and a feeling that was not quite fear just yet swept over me. I also think that being lost in the fog that day was the first time I ever felt truly alone. This sounds insane now, almost 50 years later, but I felt an overpowering feeling of being the only person in the world. Isolation, even momentary, has a strange effect on the mind, it seems. And now Raider was gone, and I had to find him. The thought of losing my beloved dog negated any preoccupation I might have had, so I pushed on blindly through the fog, walking down a slope that ended in a short tunnel. I walked in and heard the soft noise of rolling waves somewhere below, so I knew I was close to the coves, close to the water. Too close, perhaps, and such realization was not comforting in the slightest. I also heard, rather than saw, movement ahead. I heard a whimper, and then a low growl, and more whimpering. I called out Raider's name, and he barked at my voice. The sound was still ahead of me, but much closer this time. I walked on as thunderclap broke somewhere above and behind me. I had to crouch under a low, rocky ceiling. The walls were cold and wet, and twice I slipped on what I think was limestone. But there was light at the end of the short tunnel, so I pressed on. Soon, I found myself at a clearing, with a sheer drop to the water on my right and the tunnel behind me. I peered over the edge, and I saw waves breaking against the rocky shore. White foam splashed all over. The water was dark and wild and uninviting. The fog had also lifted somewhat, or perhaps not reached this lower part of the hills, but now it was cold and very dark. Long after nightfall, on a night when I wanted to be anywhere but here. And when Raider ran towards me out of nowhere, I almost fell backwards with fright. I picked him up and hugged him close, and he barked and licked my face. I usually didn't like this, but this time I let him do it. When he calmed down, I gently sat him on the ground, and where he sat wagging his tail and looking at me, the expression in his big brown eyes was unmistakable. Let's go. That's when I saw it, just ahead. The Black Gate. Another spell of thunder above. Raider whimpered and looked towards the gate, then glanced at me with pleading eyes that said, "We really need to get away from here, now." I looked at the gate. It was wrought iron, painted jet black, maybe 8 feet long by 4 feet high. The paint looked old and weathered, and was peeling off in many places. The gate hung on a hinged iron post that was almost completely covered in rust and moss. It made me think of a farm I once visited with Dad. There were 2 iron gates much like this one, with cattle grids on both sides. I was small then, and one of my feet went through the grid and I got stuck. Dad and the farmer laughed and helped me out, explaining that the grid kept the cattle safe because cows and sheep were scared to walk over it. The Black Gate looked like it had been there a long time. There was no cattle grid here, only weeds, patchy undergrowth, and dirt all around it. Beyond the gate, a sort of shelter and narrow path that took a sharp bend and then appeared to slope even further down. I could clearly hear the sound of waves reverberating through the rocky walls. I stood there, almost mesmerized, taking in all the details about this hidden part of Sudlow that I had never seen before. Raider sat beside me, shivering against my leg. His ears pricked up as his eyes dead set on the gate. And there was a smell hanging in the air, wasn't there? Some of it was undoubtedly the ozone set that precedes a storm breaking, but there was something else underneath, a vaguely unpleasant odor that I could not readily identify. The question, what was Raider barking at, suddenly occurred to me. I had only ever heard him barking from excitement, when we played fetch the stick at the beach, or just before getting fed. He would never really make a sound otherwise. I looked around and could see no animals or anything. The gate creaked, and Raider immediately began barking and growling, teeth bare. At the same time, thunder roared overhead. Raider flinched and cowered. I picked him up and tried to reassure him, but he only barked louder toward the gate, which presently creaked again. Just then, I noticed a length of chain on the side opposite the iron post. The chain hung listlessly, weighed down by a rusted padlock that seemed unlocked. Raider kept barking, and the little patch of sky I could see had turned a nasty shade of purple. Tendrils of mist swirled all around us, and some clung onto the gate, which began to loom large in my field of vision, as if a hidden force pulsed beneath its rusted metal bars. I had the weirdest and most intense feeling of being watched. And not only that, I felt unwanted. The clarity of this thought was startling. The black gate did not want me or Raider there. We did not belong. The strangeness of the moment turned into an icy splinter of fear that buried itself deep within my heart. Something was moving just beyond the gate's threshold. Something that had no shape nor form, an incorporeal thing, if you wish. Whatever it was, it came from the depths of the coves below, emerging through the mist as if it sheltered there. Raider barked and growled loud and wild. I had never seen him so distressed. Thunder rolled in from above, and a gust of wind dispersed the coils of mist long enough for me to discern at least 3 figures coming towards the black gate. Raider's bark died down immediately and turned into a moaning whimper. He trembled and shook in my arms. The figures moved slowly, slithering almost. They seem to unfurl around a mantle of fog and mist, and I think I can see arms that are long and thin that don't quite end in hands, and legs that don't quite end in feet. The 3 figures are now right on the black gate, and there they stop, like sentinels at a border crossing. They stop and watch me. An almost 12-year-old boy holding his pet dog, alone in this accursed Sudlow ground. The voice of old Mackenzie booms in my ears with a suddenness that is startling and terrifying, and I can't help but utter a loud and sorrowful moan. The gate opens only one way, young William. One way only. Walk and see for yourself, old Mackenzie says, and I see his dead body, a black mouth open and full of rotten fish, writhing in the agony of a fate worse than death. And I don't want to walk, nor can I anyway. My legs feel like they are full of pebbles. The figures stand still, watching. Two more shapes emerge from behind them and join the group at the threshold. They also watch, even though none have eyes. But I know they watch. I can feel their unseen stare bearing down on me and Raider. And then all those shapeless apparitions do something that has haunted my nights since. Those impossibly long and thin arms move slowly upwards and begin beckoning me. There may be no hands, but they are beckoning me all right, inviting me to follow them to the dark coves below. I become aware of the rumble of water somewhere down there, and the sound is angry and powerful. And as the figures beckon me, the black gate swings open with a screech that still echoes through the valleys of my mind. A crack of thunder that threatens to rend the world breaks the mesmerizing spell, long enough for my brain to react. I scream, turn around, and run back up the tunnel, hugging Raider so tightly against me that he yelps in pain. I slip and bang my body against the rocks, but I don't pay any attention. I just run, screaming against the storm, and the sound of my own voice drowns out the anguish of mortal fear. I'm still running when I reach Pilgrim's Crossway, and I don't stop running as I take the right way home this time. The mist still lingers, but the storm has dissipated it enough for me to see where I'm going. Then I'm home, and Dad asks me why I'm sweating so much and why I have so many bruises. I tell him that I got caught outside. I ran and slipped and fell into a puddle. Dad looked at me for a moment longer as I stood there, panting, thinking that my heart is about to explode. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, but said nothing. He nodded instead and told me to change into dry clothes before dinner. I said earlier that I have never had much of an imagination, so tales of ghostly apparitions, monsters hiding inside closets and the likes never really got to me. There are many such tales about Sudlow, just like in many other towns and cities, I guess. And I'm not saying that what I saw that misty, stormy evening at the Black Gate were ghosts. Age has diluted the memories to an extent, turning them into figments of a reality that my own dreams have surely distorted over the years. I moved out of Sudlow about 4 years after that day, and never returned. I took Raider with me, but the poor lad was never the same. He died in my arms shortly afterwards. I have turned the events over and over in my mind, trying to rationalize the experience, but I just can't do it. No matter how much I try to convince myself otherwise, I do know that I once stood there at the Black Gate, and that there were things beyond it, things that watched. And I also do know, and of this I have an absolute certainty that I just cannot explain. I know that if I had walked through the Black Gate that day, I would not be telling you this story now. Thank you, brave listeners, for joining me today. Please join me again next week for another frightening tale, or listen to one of more than 100 previous episodes. If you enjoyed your time here, please support my work. If you've been watching on YouTube, like the episode and subscribe to the channel. If you've been tuned in on Apple Podcast, please rate the channel as you see fit. And if you've been listening to the program on Spotify, I'd love to hear your comments. Most of all, share frightening tales with those around you and support today's authors however you can. Until next time, when I share with you another frightening tale, listen, if you're brave enough.